To finish it, we're too far now to even consider quitting. Can't quit. Got to do it.
There is some risk, but we've evaluated all these things. We've been in aviation a long time to know what the risks are and try to minimize them as much as we can.
The risks were substantial. Over the weekend, Voyager hit such severe turbulence that Rutan thought it might crash into the Atlantic. But it made it. Rutan and Yaeger have made it home and into the history books.
And indeed they have. There they are over the 15,000-foot-long tarmac strip at Edwards Air Force Base, from which they took off 9 full days ago. And there she is, Voyager, plodding along with both engines going now, one at the rear and one at the front, at about 75 miles an hour. Gary Shepard is out at Edwards Air Force Base. Gary, this is going to be a kind of formalized landing, isn't it? They're going to do a flyover?
Good morning, Peter. Yes, indeed. In fact, they're flying over right now as we speak. They're well below 9,000 feet. Our best guess is they've come down to an altitude of about 5,000. 3 chase planes accompanying Voyager. And we're only a few minutes before it finally touches down on this lake bed behind me here at Edwards Air Force Base, a touchdown after this incredible around-the-world trip of more than 26,000 miles.
Those of you at home can see what looks like a front wing going from the 2 long gas tanks on the side across the front of the aircraft. That's the secret to this flight, into this slow flight, among other things. That's called a canard there, and it prevents an aircraft from stalling when it flies at such unusually low speeds as this one. And Burt Rutan, who is the designer of the aircraft, the man who had the idea originally, says he actually got the idea from the Wright brothers in 1903. When they first flew their first aircraft, it had one of those canards, one of those struts across the front.
Peter, as we look at Voyager coming in over Edwards, we should recall, of course, that Edwards has been the scene where so many test flights and space flights have landed. 18 space shuttles landed there at Edwards Air Force Base, and it looks to me from this vantage point at least that Voyager is getting just about the same kind of reception as the early shuttle flight landings did. That magnificent, huge lake bed, which allows for all kinds of error when a pilot has little or no fuel left, gives them lots and very, very forgiving space there. But obviously they are going to aim for that compass rose right in the middle of that lake bed that they're aiming for.
In fact, one of the reasons they come down at Edwards, and NASA and the Air Force have given their facilities again today, is because you can land on that dry bed and go virtually in any direction. Unless there's any rain at that 44-square-mile airbase, you can hardly make any mistakes. There they are, down below 10,000 feet. With Gary Shepard in California is the technical director of the Voyager team, Jack Norris. Jack, how does it look to you?
Jack, how does this final moments of Voyager look to you from your vantage point here? You've been with this right from the beginning.
It looks pretty exciting. It's the end of a very long, hard trail for the Dick Rutan and Jeana yaeger.
This has not been a flight without its harrowing moments, and even last night, Peter, there was a great deal of concern about fuel because a lot of the fuel in the right wing was unable to get to the engines. And Jack, explain to us what exactly happened.
Well, basically what happened, a very simple little pump failed, but that one pump pumped all the fuel from the right-hand side of the airplane. So when it failed, it was a major problem.
How was it solved?
Basically, it was solved by replumbing the airplane this morning. Jeana replumbed the entire fuel system inside the cockpit so they could get to more fuel.
And as a result of that replumbing, the fear that Voyager would come in with only 2 gallons available to it went away, didn't it?
That's correct. That's correct. There's enough fuel on the right side of the airplane to still go a very long distance, but it wasn't available with the failed pump.
And now that Jeana fixed that problem, there's no longer a concern that you're landing on fumes, right?
That's correct. The fuel's there, we just couldn't get to it with the failed pump.
Gary, Voyager is now circling overhead and slowly coming down. We believe it's below 5,000 feet right now with its 3 chase planes and Dick Rutan getting ready to set it down on this lake bed behind us.
Well, Gary, while he goes through the fairly laborious hand-operated process of putting the gear down, we want to check in with ABC's medical editor, Tim Johnson, who's watching this with us from Boston. because, Tim, we're all very keen to know what kind of shape that Jeana Yaeger and Dick Rutan are going to be in after having spent this long, almost 9 days, in incredibly cramped circumstances. What's your best guess?
Well, right from the start, Peter, they have had 4 major concerns. One was making sure they could get enough oxygen in the unpressurized cabin, and they had devised a very ingenious little system to deliver oxygen. Nonetheless, there has been some concern that they may have low oxygen levels in their blood. That could contribute to some of the erratic behavior, along with, of course, the second concern, which was fatigue. The third concern was hydration based on their previous test flights. So they've had little packets of water and other fluids to take on an every 6-hour basis, and they've been checking their own urine regularly for specific gravity to make sure they did not be dehydrated. The fourth and final concern that they had was the hearing problem. The noise level in the cabin, as has been widely reported, is above the 100 decibel range. That's in the range of such things as jackhammers and subways. They did devise a special pair of headphones that they've been wearing, and I talked to the doctor last night who has been monitoring as best he can their progress. He does not think they have suffered a lot of hearing loss, but that's one of the things they will check. So those are the 4 areas they're going to look at very carefully when they get down.
One of the things that Bert Rutan, the designer, told us last night that they would look for first, Tim, was to see whether Jeana and Dick could actually walk when they got out of the cockpit.
Well, in fact, the actual compression in that small space may make it difficult for them to move at first when they get out, but they will be looking for more serious underlying bruises that might make that difficult. I think their major concern, however, are in the areas of the fatigue and the psychological effects more than the actual bruising, which with time should wear off.
While we're on the subject of the cockpit, there's probably not any doubt in anybody's mind that they have gone around the world now without stopping and without refueling. But when they land on the ground, the National Aeronautics Administration is going to check very quickly for the proof that they have not landed anywhere. There are 2 ways they can do that. That cockpit, that tiny cockpit bubble on the top of the fuselage, has actually been sealed for the entire flight. And when it gets down, they will check, the NAA will check to see that the seals on the cockpit have not been broken. And there is also something resembling a barometer, which will show whether the aircraft has ever been down to sea level, whether it might have landed in some remote part of the world. But I don't think there's anybody in the world this morning who has any doubt that these 2 heroic Americans, Jeana Yaeger and Dick Rutan, Jeana 34, Dick 48, 49 now, have been around the world nonstop without refueling, and as Jack Norris told us out there in California, with fuel left to burn. In fact, Dick Rutan last night said they could come on to from California to New York and then out into the Atlantic again.
I don't think they're going to be too eager to, Peter. This has been, as you keep mentioning, a grueling flight for these individuals.
Dick Rutan has said on more than one occasion, Lynn, that all the celebration aside, and there are a lot of people that turned out at Edwards this morning, what he really wants to do is go to bed.
And then, of course, they would like to go into the history books, which they will automatically.
Let's see if we can hear a little of the air-to-ground conversation.
That always happens, Peter. When you go to listen, they stop talking. They'll come back to us in just a minute. I was about to say that this...
very proud that you all come out to see our landing. Because after all, it was the grassroots American support that made this thing possible.
That's Dick Rutan.
Let's join on. He's doing some back over the landing area for the...
Dick Rutan, who is among the most patriotic of individuals, saying this morning that it was Americans who made it possible. He didn't want a lot of corporate sponsorship on this flight, and he and Jeana and his brother Bert have done this on a shoestring. Someone speculated that if this had been done by a large corporation, it would have cost in the neighborhood of $20 million. Bert Rutan, who's been designing airplanes for years, both for the home-built market and model airplanes before that, has some money, but not enough to mount a $20 million operation by any means.
And Peter, I should also point out, I spoke to some of the folks over at NASA. You're quite right, they did not sponsor this, but the individuals there, their tongues are hanging out. This is exactly, exactly the kind of achievement any pilot would go for. These folks, according to one person there, are way out there on the edge.
You know what the people on the ground, the first thing they're going to want when they meet us is they're going to want to get a long ways away. I want to tell you what, Americans sure is proud of you. Now we're proud to be Americans. I tell you what, when people are free, they can do anything they want to. It's all they got to do is dream it. This is the last first in aviation, and atypically was done by Americans.
The last first in aviation said by either Dick or perhaps Bert on the ground there at Mission Control, reminding us, Lynn, very much of Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart and the comparisons between them.
Well, you really can't help make those comparisons. Amelia Earhart was also 34 when she made her first great achievement, which was being the first woman to cross the Atlantic alone in 1932.
Photo change, you're clear to rejoin. One form and photo. Put the gear down.
They don't really look alike, but you can see a certain resemblance between Jeana Yeager and Amelia Earhart, that kind of lean aviator look, which of course used to be in aviatrix, but I think we've gotten beyond all that. A certain similarity also in the way they are both shy, somewhat retiring people who are out there to do a job, and they're out there to do a job because the job is there to be done.
Dick Rutan and Jeana Yeager are companions, never quite sure how you say it, but they live together, they work together. They met at an air show some years ago, and then when they joined up with Bert, the designer, it has been a real family affair. Jeana, as Lynn said, is 34 years old. Dick is the older brother. Both the boys grew up in California. Their father was a dentist, and it was their father who first discovered his own love of flying and passed it on to his boys. Jeana Yeager was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, and both Jeana and Dick hold an extraordinary number of world records for both distance and for time already. Jeana herself holds 8 world records, and Dick, I've forgotten how many he owns, but it is even more than that. Incredible companions, both in the air and on the ground. And there you get some sense, so the first sense we've really had of any speed at all. The aircraft will land at about 57 or 58 miles an hour, all things considered. But there's what an aircraft looks like up against something going about 75 miles an hour.
Edwards Tower. After this pass, the Chase 2 and 3 will land on runway 23.
Runway 23 for the chase plane.
Roger, and advise when you want to land. Okay. He's not on the ground yet. He's over to the road. Flybys to the crowd.
You have to get the gear down by hand when you build an aircraft that is as light as this one. The fuel weighed 5 times more than the aircraft. You've got to do a lot by hand. There are backup systems, but everything is done at an absolute minimum.
And I believe, Peter, that when it lands, it weighs about as much as a small car. It's going about the same speed, and it weighs about that.
You're amazed. I must admit that there has been times during this flight I did not think it was going to be successful. Well, congratulations.
Dick Rutan saying there were times during this flight when he didn't think it was going to be successful, and surely one of those when he was over the west coast of Africa. They got into a storm that they had not anticipated. He virtually turned this enormous wingspan edge up on its side and practically had to beg Mission Control to tell him how to get out of the storm.
I'll see if I can still walk.
Dick will do the landing.
I just shot 1 foot at a time. It works out good. Ah, there you go.
Should probably point out,
Congratulations, you guys. Thank you.
Peter, those flaps on the tip, the winglets at the ends of the wings, the one of which broke off on takeoff and the other they took off themselves, apparently will have, certainly has no bearing whatsoever on the landing. No danger to them at all now.
They're going to make another pass while Dick Rutan tries to get the gear down. One of the things, Lynn, that really catches my ear as they talk back and forth with Mission Control is how much more casual it is than when NASA lands the shuttle. There are no congratulations to the NASA people on board, to the astronauts.
The family welcomes you back for Christmas.
Until they're on the ground.
Good time of year to come home.
But, Peter, they are tired. I wonder if Gary Shepard and Jack Norris have any thoughts on landing that plane after almost 9 days of being awake for these folks.
Is it a hard plane to land, Gary and Jack?
The plane comes over this time in its clean cruise configuration. Make one more orbit, and it'll take about 15 minutes for
of what it's like now for Dick Rutan after 9 days up there to bring this plane in.
Individual, each gear is individually
Very
hand cranked down
flexible
to
airplane.
very small lightweight
Very
cable.
efficient. Therefore, it's very hard to bring down. It loses altitude very slowly.
So it has to creep down, foot by foot. It can't do a diving landing.
That's correct. It doesn't have flaps or other drag devices, so it can only lose energy so fast.
Dick Rutan being so tired, so fatigued, Is this going to be a problem for him to judge distances and heights and depths and so forth for this landing?
I think it certainly will be. Dick is a very good pilot, but of course he's been subjected to 9 days of real fatigue. But I'm sure he'll do well.
Peter, one thing, a few moments ago, Voyager flew right overhead, and a lot of the crowd of spectators here broke out into applause as the plane flew over. It's probably going to do several more flyovers before it lands, but I think our guess is that it should be down in the next several minutes. So what do you think, Jack?
Yes, probably about 10 minutes. It takes quite a while to crank the gear down, so he'll probably make a few passes while they do that.
Now, Dick is at the controls while Jeana cranks the gear down.
That's
right?
the usual arrangement, right.
And it takes, that's all done manually.
Yes, both gears are cranked down manually, one at a time. The nose gear moves up and down pretty swiftly, but the main gear takes a long time.
You know, Gary, I'm really struck by all these comparisons with the shuttle, since we're used to watching shuttles landing at Edwards. The shuttle is so totally automatic. Nobody is cranking down the landing gear there. You, of course, have missed out on the great sonic boom because of the lack of speed at which Voyager is traveling. But it appears as if all of the excitement of a shuttle landing is right there anyway.
The excitement is definitely here. There are an estimated 50,000 people who have come out here to Edwards Air Force Base today to watch this. Spectators, many of them arrived last night in trailers and cars and spent the night here, sleeping during the nighttime hours and waiting for the dawn to arrive. It's an incredible traffic jam, as a matter of fact, on the ground at Edwards Air Force Base. Not so bad in the air right now, Jack Norris.
No, they only have the Voyager and its 3 basic chase planes.
One thing we're anxious to see is when Dick Rutan and jeana Yaeger emerge from the cockpit. We are told that they will probably not be able to walk and will have to be helped out of the plane. Is that your understanding,
I think
Jack?
that's a real possibility. You have to remember that they've been horizontal in that airplane for 9 days, and the body is very adaptable, so it's probably lowered its blood pressure. So they shouldn't stand up too quickly.
Gary, while you're on the subject of health, let's call in Tim Johnson again. Tim, among other things, they've been battered and bruised around, thrown around that tiny cockpit. I know you've been talking to the medical director of the mission. What else has he commented on?
Well, he's been really quite impressed with how well they've done despite all of the terrible conditions that you've been talking about. I should point out, I guess, that their medical operation is consistent with the rest of the operation, kind of an informal shoestring type operation. A family practitioner from Northern California who's a friend of one of the engineers involved in the program is serving as the medical director. They're not going to do many very sophisticated tests. For example, they're not going to do any real formal psychological testing, which would have been interesting, but they do have the backup of the Edwards Air Force Base personnel, and a psychologist from that base will be there in case he's needed. They're planning on doing some very simple blood tests, urine tests, an electrocardiogram. They're certainly going to check the hearing now and then follow a period of several weeks. But really, they have a lot of confidence in these two people. They think they're going to rebound very quickly and with some good sleep be just fine again.
Well, as you can see, just as clearly as we can now, jeana Yaeger has managed to hand crank the gear down. You can just see it dipping under those long 110-foot wings. And Dick Rutan is now bringing Voyager in for its final pass over this great dry lake bed about 2 hours north of Los Angeles in California.
Accompanied, of course, by a chase plane. Those planes have been up there trying to keep stray aircraft out of the way, in part, so that no one interferes, and just to keep the curious and the sightseers away.
Well, only one wheel is on at the moment, so we could only see one until they came around the other way. Now jeana Yaeger's got to crank the other one down, so they'll turn very gently in the sky with that very rigid forward wing, enabling them to fly at this incredibly slow speed for an aircraft, somewhere around 70 miles an hour now, slowing down to a little under 60 miles an hour for the actual landing itself. This is, at least in the mind of Burt Rutan, the designer of the aircraft, much more than just an individual challenge, because the technical fallout from the technological capacity which you see there almost floating around over Edwards could apply to airplanes in the future that need to loiter for long periods of time at very low speed, at high fuel efficiency. It could even result in the development of an improved capability to haul cargo. One of the suggestions has been that you could use aircraft with this technological capability to bring oil off the North Slope in Alaska. And one commercial company in the country, the Beach Aircraft, has taken a really enormous, perhaps less enormous chance today than it looked many months ago. On Burt Rutan, the Beach Aircraft Company is going to put into production something called the Beach Star ship, which is of a very similar design to the one that Burt Rutan used for the Voyager. That is, with that canard, that very stiff forward wing that gives the aircraft this low-flying, slow-flying capability. The same design that the Wright brothers used essentially in 1903. Let's listen again to Mission Control.
That little counter has to work. We may have to do it all over again. You didn't think landing on some aircraft carrier, did you? No. Plus I didn't gear up.
That is...
Yeah, we have a visual on the right main gear door is open.
The
Yeah,
right.
and I can see Jeana's doing it very smoothly, and here comes the tire coming into sight.
That's the right tire coming down there.
Just behind the rear propeller, if you can see it, looking under at the rear of the aircraft, just going down under the center wingspan.
They really eyeball that from the ground. You heard what he said. You saw the door opening, the tire coming down, and obviously the pilots need that.
About 70% down now.
These, of course, are the first really great pictures that we have had of this mission, because the Rutan brothers and Jeana Yaeger very carefully did not tell people where they were around the world, lest commercial aircraft and, quite frankly, news media aircraft try to fly up and take photographs and interfere with their flight. They had planned a couple of rendezvous of their own, one over Hawaii, which worked, one over Thailand, which did not work because the Thais could not understand why one American aircraft would like to take off from Thailand to go and chase another American aircraft in the skies of Southeast Asia. So these are the most glorious pictures of the full 9 days.
Well, it gets to lower the nose gear, so we'll try that right now.
That's the last landing point they need, which is the nose wheel.
So the autopilot must come on. Autopilot on, Mark.
Dick, what advice can you give us to all plane pilots?
That's the first time we've heard Jeana's voice in quite some time. She's the one
busy.
that's putting down the gear.
You did a good job getting those gear down. Roger, always put your gear down before you land. That's very good advice.
Thank you, Dick. Congratulations.
Well, all we've heard about their fatigue does not show at the moment. The adrenaline must be coursing through them at the moment. There's certainly a sense of humor there. They've only had about 4 hours sleep a day, and it cannot have been a very restful sleep. At one point, Dick Rutan tried to take a sleeping pill. We won't know till they get on the ground whether or not that worked.
And Peter, keep in mind that this flight, which we are celebrating, which appears to be such a remarkable achievement, and they're about to land, they were supposed to take off once before they really did. They had a delay, as we have experienced in other vehicles in this country. And
Okay, Dick, we show that the nose gear is out, the door is open, and I'm just moving in to check the over-center position.
coming down with the nose gear. But this, someone pointed out to me, no one will remember the downtime. No one will remember that there was a delay. They will only remember the achievement, and that's probably exactly the way it should be.
Heading from the north to the south. All right, Voyager 1-5 here, we are in position.
Making yet another...
Confirm that gear is down and locked, and we were asked to look at the nose gear real carefully because there was some talk of a low-pressure front tire. I disagree with that entirely. I'd say it's blown up just exactly like it was when you left.
Some concern about whether there was enough air in the front tire, which will play a critical role when they touch down. But somebody on the ground, eyeballing it, as Lynn says it seems to be full of air, as it was when they left.
Chase confirms that you are in the landing configuration, and go get it, boy. This is the big one, the one you've been training for. This is the big one, yeah.
Well, with a cockpit the size of theirs, they have got to have help from the ground, telling them what is going on. What they are doing up there is pure exploration, pure technological development. There is absolutely no reason for for them to have flown this flight except to see if they could do it. This is, well, he says, the last first in aviation. Someone will find another one, but the idea that you could just come up with something that hadn't been done and go do it.
There are some folks, of course, then, who've been cynical about it, but as they go silent now in preparation for what has got to be a very tense moment, I would guess even the cynics have been sent back a little in their chairs. Just imagine them now. Jeana is lying down beside Bert. He's sitting up, perhaps with his head up in the bubble of that cockpit now, because that's the only way he can see forward, backwards. In fact, he can see 360 degrees if he gets his head up into that little plexiglass bubble there you see sitting on top of the aircraft. The aircraft is so fuselage and the cockpit are so small that Jeana is lying down beside him and working for the most part on her back. This was not designed for comfort.
Voyager 1, this is 5. You are now exactly 1 minute, 30 seconds short of 9 days.
1 minute, 30 seconds short of 9 days from when they took off from this same Air Force base in Southern California.
But to understand that, just make sure we fly another minute here before we land.
They're going for that record, Peter. They're not.
I think you're fed on that. My watch was the one that read 8 o'clock when you started the roll, and it's 8 o'clock now.
9 days, huh? 9 days without a shower.
9 days without a shower. It's a good thing they like each other.
When you build another one, Dick, you ought to put a shower in. Make it sound worse than, say, 216 hours.
Okay, stand by, guys. We're going to recover this airplane.
Interesting how much attention, Peter, they are paying to all the details like that, exactly when they're going to land.
Voyager 1, Edwards, tower check, wheels downwind, clear to land, compass rose.
This is a
Voyager 1, clear to land on the road. We have figuring. Checklist is completed.
It's a very sophisticated attempt to break a record.
VRAP for this landing will be 50 per knot. 50 per knot VRAP for the touchdown of 3 knots.
These folks will be all over the publishing pages and the television screens. That's part of their prize.
And confirm, Mike, you will be right side. Confirmed, Fitz will be on the right side, well clear of him. He's got it now. Okay, fine, I'll be well clear left.
Move those chase planes off, someone says.
Land parallel to one of those markers that I'm 90 degrees to right now. You can turn.
All right.
Okay.
He's had a tremendous amount of help from the ground, as we mentioned, when he got in storms.
South, but if you happen to line up one that's a little off of that, as long as it's...
Dick Rutan asked Mission Control how to get out of them, and from many, many thousands of miles away, someone in Mission Control said, turn left.
Land due south.
I think he practically begged to get out of one of them. It was terribly turbulent.
The runway you're coming up to here is essentially due south, so it'll be essentially parallel to that.
Okay, we'll come on around to the next one then.
Again, a reminder, you can land almost
Approximately 2 knots from your right rear quarter.
anywhere on this dry lake bed and not find yourself in trouble. That's why it is so immensely useful today, as it has been to the shuttle in the past. They are not trying to land on the tarmac from which they took off, and you'll recall on takeoff along which they scraped that 110-foot wingspan because they were so heavily loaded with fuel.
And they are landing, Peter, almost exactly where the shuttle has come in. In fact, this runway 23, which I believe they're aiming for, is the one the shuttle used for testing crosswind landings to see how the shuttle would do with the crosswind. I suppose the folks at Edwards are extremely happy to have all this attention and to have something there breaking another record for them.
There's no problem running over any of these markers, is there?
As long as you land inside the circle, you're in great shape.
Okay.
We haven't seen anything of ground rescue equipment. I wonder if there is a convoy or something in case of problems.
One spot, we just ran it with the van and it's quite smooth.
Ran it with the van. That's the actual piece of strip on which they will come down. They've just run it with a truck And it seems quite smooth, says Mission
Got wheel
Control.
height, Fitz. You're still at least 100 feet.
Landing at about 56, 57 miles an hour, 54 knots to be precise.
Put this line up. I can see the marks where they were running the van just earlier. You're probably about 75 feet now. That's probably about 40 feet.